Hey folks, this is Kalani. For Legion, we'll be getting artifacts, we'll be getting class halls, and a new revamp of the PvP system, among other things. But we know there's something big that's yet to be officially announced. So what could that super shiny, awesomely tasty feature be? What about this new adventure mode that we got wind of from that out of the blue DragonCon panel? Adventure mode. What could this new addition to World of Warcraft entail? Before we start, I should mention that this feature has a big old maybe stamped right next to it, but that shouldn't come as a surprise after what happened with Warlords. You know, if we find out that it's a maybe now, we can't really complain if it doesn't make it into Legion for launch, as quite a few things didn't for Warlords. But with the red tape out of the way, let's have a look under the hood at what adventure mode could mean for World of Warcraft. If anyone's played Diablo 3 at all, you should have heard this term before, adventure mode. Instead of having to crawl through all of the campaign modes and select specific chapters to get to specific areas, Blizzard just threw the entire game at us and said have fun. This was adventure mode, and it came with a few extra bits and pieces. The idea was pretty brilliant, allow players to swap between each act and area with complete freedom. There would be random tasks you could complete called bounties. If you completed them all, you got a bag of goodies to open and could either move on to the next act or map, or restart your game to refresh your bounties for the act you just cleared. It worked very well for Diablo, but would a similar system work for Warcraft? I don't think a simple copy-paste approach would go down too well, but we may see some of the same ideas. Imagine if you had a board or a map like your Garrison Shipyard table. You could choose between each of the maps of Warcraft: Eastern Kingdoms, Kalimdor, Outland, Northrend, Pandaria and Draenor, very much how like archaeology works now. You would have random locations with some form of objective. This could come in any shape or form, but the most likely would be a bonus objective. These were brand new in Draenor and gave us a new way to gain experience. Everyone will likely remember completing their first one while leveling and just gawking at the experience reward. Then once you got to Gorgrond, well, let's just say very few of those objectives were left standing. The bonus objective system is something we know works, and you can throw any number of things into the objectives. Punt some little flower thing, collect whatever is lying around on the floor, kill a few monsters and maybe even a mini-boss or a rare. Completing the objective or mission could reward a small amount of currency, resource, material, or even a piece of gear, but completing every mission for a given map could reward something a little shinier. Gear on par with heroic dungeons maybe, currency for specific vendors, maybe reputation with factions involved in the areas you cleared. The rewards you could throw into the system are pretty much endless. You could even have it like the call to arms bags with dungeons and have a low chance for mounts or pets. That provides an extra way to play the game and potentially an alternative gearing path if people get a little tired of dungeons. If you throw in a few rare or shiny rewards, people will happily chase them, so an adventure mode at max level would make a lot of sense, and if we're going by the Diablo model, that's not all it could be used for. Imagine the same system, but if you're not at max level, all of the rewards also include experience. Tie in the scaling technology we've seen in a bunch of the newest systems added to World of Warcraft, and you could have another leveling path as well. Scale the player up or the area down, maybe have the areas as a separate instance for level brackets, or treat them exactly like the old scenarios. Suddenly, instead of being forced into the campaign mode of World of Warcraft, that is, having to go through all the expansions as you typically would, following the quest lines or just dungeoning your way through, you could happily trek around the world as you saw fit, not having to worry about which quests to pick up next or what expansion you need to drudge through after this one. It provides the same freshness that the adventure mode in Diablo gave without having to add a new section of the world. So, talking about this from a Diablo point of view is fine and dandy. You know, Blizzard made both games, they designed both games, and it wouldn't be the first time they would take bits and pieces that were successful and put them into one of their other games. But what if adventure mode is nothing like Diablo's version? What if it's actually more to do with dungeons? We know that the team at Blizzard want to make dungeons more relevant again. Adding in additional functionality there would be a step in the right direction. So what kinds of things could we expect from an adventure mode which is tied to dungeons? A few recent MMOs decided to make dungeons a little differently. Essentially, you'd have a story or campaign mode of the dungeon, why we originally, head that way, and why we're even there in the first place, and then after that's completed, the dungeon opens up. into more of an exploration deal. WildStar and Guild Wars 2 had different ways of doing this, and WoW could probably implement something similar, but far more impressive. So if they went with the Guild Wars 2 way of doing things, you would have the story mode of the dungeon, the initial playthrough where you get the story and the reason for why we're plundering such valuable treasures. Then after the dungeon is cleaned out of whatever corrupted nonsense drew our attention in the first place, a few new paths open up in the dungeon. That means new bosses, new secret passages, and you could tell a different story in that exact same setting. It's an interesting way of doing things, but I think WoW could do things much better. Now WildStar did things a little differently. Their first round of dungeons was more like a choose your own adventure style of play, where you'd reach a certain point in the dungeon and then you'd be able to choose what to do next. This created several paths you could take to complete the dungeon and kept things interesting for longer. You know, you could go one way and kill a large group of mobs and have to deal with them, or you could go another way and potentially struggle with a puzzle, and if you can't do the puzzle, well, you gotta go the other way anyway. So kind of a risk-reward system where you could take more challenging directions in a dungeon and potentially complete it quicker and be rewarded, you know, better for it, or kind of fail and extend it because, you know, not quite good enough to do that challenge. It's an interesting way of doing it, and WoW's dungeons could definitely benefit from it. But sadly, this also created the issue of the path of least resistance. After a few playthroughs, people figured out the fastest, safest, and overall most efficient ways of completing these tasks, and many available paths never really got played. But what if we take things one step further? Imagine if we had access to a large dungeon. Initially, it would be very linear, standard WoW dungeons that we're all used to. Progress through each boss until you get to the end and kill the final boss. But after that's taken care of, the rest of the dungeon opens up for exploration. Hidden bosses and passages, specific bosses tied to classes, hidden treasure rooms, roles, professions, quests, puzzles to unlock extra areas. You know, there's so much potential to basically hide things in dungeons. After we've taken care of the initial threat, we then can, you know, explore and plunder to our heart's content. All these tasty little treasure rooms and chests which these people have been hoarding, and now that we've cleaned them out, we're free to just do whatever we want. It would be fantastic, and it would be nice to actually have a reason to explore the areas we're running through instead of just trying to get to the last boss as quickly as we can. That could be our adventure mode, bring the adventure back into dungeons. But maybe it's nothing. Maybe we won't even get it in Legion. Either way, it's exciting to hear that Blizzard has new things planned for World of Warcraft. New ways to play the game and new content is always the best thing to hear and talk about. But what are your thoughts? Will this adventure mode be something completely new and different, or are we finally getting a new way to level? Leave your questions, queries and theories in the comments section below and we can have a good old natter down there. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.